More light to this, we welcome our good buddy Ariel Helwani from MMAfighting.com, the host of the MMA Hour and MMA Beat to the program. Thanks for taking some time, bud. How are you?
It is my pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me. By the way, if you wanted to have CM Punk on instead, I won't be offended. He's a great guy.
What's he up to these days?
Phil Brooks. I just like to drop, his name sometimes to show that we're on, first name basis. He's still very much, wanting to pursue an MMA career and continue his career. If anyone thought that it was a publicity stunt, that it was a one-off, that's on him. I mean, he's been at the gym, almost right after the fight. Like the following week, he was back in there, traveling to Milwaukee from Chicago. He has not given up on this. He has a deep passion for mixed martial arts. The only unfortunate thing for him is that he got into it a little late, his body a little beaten up from pro wrestling. But if anyone thinks that, he was just doing this for a few extra bucks or for some publicity, sorely mistaken. And at this point, I think he's proven that, considering how his debut went. The fact that he's still doing it, training, working hard, dreaming about the next fight says a lot, in my opinion.
Do you ever think he steps in a WWE ring again?
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say a UFC octagon. Well, that's a little bit outside of my domain. I mean, I'm a longtime pro wrestling fan, although I don't watch it anymore. And one thing I do know about the WWE and Vince McMahon in particular is, I mean, there's no real grudge that will get in the way of him trying to do some business. And I think that's to his credit. I mean, whoever thought back in the day that Hall and Nash and Hogan would show up after they left to go to WCW? I mean, he's pretty much buried the hatchet with everyone, including Bret Hart. And, as Canadians, we know that was a really deep cut as far as Bret is concerned. And, of course, what happened to his brother Owen, and the fact that he was able to, put that aside and do business once again with Vince, I think says a lot. So I'll never say never when it comes to the world of pro wrestling, but as far as like the actual, interim and in the short term, all that, I don't think so. He has zero interest. I mean, I can't, from what, I talked to him about, like, he probably has more interest in like gardening TV shows than watching Monday Night Raw.
He is an opinionated guy. Well, just before we get on to Ronda, the likelihood then of him stepping into an octagon again, as you alluded to, how would you handicap that?
I would not count that one out. In particular, in this day and age where the UFC was sold for $4.025 billion. To WME IMG. They need stars. They need draws. They need people who are going to attract an audience. They need people who are going to, quote unquote, move the needle. And he brings a fan base. Right now, you look at the first 2 months of the UFC schedule, it's a little thin. And when you consider the fact that, Ronda may be gone for X amount of time, that Conor may be gone for a little bit because he's about to be a father, I'm starting to wonder where are the stars, where are the draws, where are the pay-per-view buys? And before anyone, takes this clip and shows it to someone in the UFC and they get all upset and say, oh, people have been saying this about us for years, all I'm saying is that, this sport is very cyclical. 2 years ago, they had a very bad year. Last year, they had a phenomenal year. So the sport goes up and down. Right now, they're, I think, a little bit going down after, an unimaginable year, 5 pay-per-views over 1 million buys. So, they need to go up and down, and right now they're a little bit down, and that's why a guy like CM Punk could help a little bit, and that's why I wouldn't count it out.
Visiting with Ariel Helwani, and we want to talk about Ronda Rousey here. So I like to start these things with general questions, Ariel, but let's kind of break it down in a timeline here. Going back to November 2015, UFC 193 and the loss to Holly Holm, what changed on that night in terms of being in the octagon, but also how it may have affected Ronda Rousey, the aftermath of that loss?
Well, to be honest, it actually started a little bit before that. She accepted a fight against Holly Holm. So it starts late August. She shows up on Good Morning America, and she announces that she's going to fight Holly Holm. And initially that fight was supposed to happen in January, but then they had this massive show planned for Melbourne, Australia in mid-November, 55,000 seat people. They're going to try to break their own record, and the headliners Carlos Condit, Robbie Lawler, they got injured. Robbie got injured, so they postponed it, and they needed something big, so they brought in Ronda, and that was 2 months before, when she was originally scheduled to fight, so she had to expedite things in her training camp. Then there was some drama, outside of the gym, so to speak. Her mother, went really hard at her coach, Edmond Tarverdian, disparaged him, said a lot of negative things about him. Some gossip about her love life came up. She seemed to have kind of a short fuse when it came to the media. She hung up on a conference call. I was even told by the UFC the day that we were flying out to Melbourne, I'm flying from New York to Melbourne to go cover this fight. I'm told that day that not only won't she talk to anyone from my website, she won't talk to me as well. Not necessarily because of something that I did, but because she was unhappy with the website. And so she was kind of blocking us out, which was, somewhat bizarre behavior. So it kind of started there. At the weigh-ins, she acts a little erratically. She goes into the fight. She gets thoroughly dominated. She loses in very convincing fashion, and there, the air of invincibility just goes out the window. She's rattled. Her jaw is messed up. She's knocked out, unconscious. I mean, we've never seen her in that state before. She had been so dominant up until that point. And the problem was she never got over the loss. The wounds were still very fresh going into this fight. And I'm expediting things here, but the fight, just a couple of weeks ago, she never got over it. She wouldn't talk to the media. She only did 3 interviews, one with Conan, one with Ellen, and one with ESPN, the magazine, all somewhat controlled. She never answered any questions about the loss. She never moved on from the loss. So anyone who's telling you that she was a fraud, that she was overhyped, no, that's wrong. She just was a fighter that didn't get over her previous loss. It was still bothering her inside, and you saw that in the fight against Amanda Nunes. First punch lands, deja vu. She can't quite adjust, and, it's the beginning of the end. So that's really what happened. I mean, her life was turned upside down, and she never quite adjusted.
Well, and she admitted on the Ellen program after the Holm loss that she had experienced suicidal thoughts, Ariel. So that really gives you insight as well into where her head was at after that. And she strikes me perhaps as some kind of a perfectionist or something.
Well, that's 100% right. She always talked about being undefeated, retiring undefeated. That's who I am. And she mentioned on that Ellen show, if I'm not an undefeated fighter, what am I? She took the loss too hard. And look, she has every right to. This is her life. This is her legacy. This is her career. She's a trailblazer. She could take losses and wins however she likes. It's her life. But I think, you see some fighters, they respond to losses and they're able to turn that negative into a positive, and some are more emotional and it maybe takes them a little longer and they don't have the right people around them. There's a myriad of factors that come into play. And for whatever reason, she was unable to turn the page, unfortunately, from that loss to Holly Holm.
Can she recover from this? Like
sure.
two losses now?
Yeah, Ronda Rousey has lost on bigger stages in the UFC. She lost in the Olympics twice. In 2004, she didn't medal. In 2008, she got a bronze medal, which means she didn't achieve her ultimate goal. So she can absolutely, she's a special athlete. She's a special kind of human being. Can she not recover? Yes, absolutely as well. But, would I bet against her recovering? No. She's just a different kind of cat. But there are certainly, I think, some things that she maybe needs to change in her training, in her life, in order to fully move on. Maybe she needs to open herself up to the media once again, not think that the media is against her. It's funny, leading up to that fight, Dana White said that the MMA media turned on Ronda Rousey, which I thought was completely false. And after this fight, the MMA media has almost been forced to defend Ronda Rousey and her legacy, because it's all, the Johnny-come-latelys, the mainstream media that have been calling her a fraud and overhyped and things like that, which is completely unfair. Just because she's lost 2 in a row has nothing to do with what she did before that. When she was the champion, she was beating the best of the best at 135 pounds. Make no mistake about that. The absolute upper echelon of that division, she was beating them, she was finishing them, she was beating them in seconds. So just because she lost 2 in a row doesn't take anything away from her legacy. And in MMA, you have to understand that some of the best fighters in the world have double-digit losses on their records. Losses don't mean as much in the sport. You dust yourself off, you move on, you come back, you live to fight another day. Eli Manning had a horrible game at Lambeau Field on Sunday. Does that take away from his Super Bowls? No. But for some reason in fight sports, someone loses once or twice in a row, we want to blow everything up and question their legacy and who they are. It doesn't work that way, and it certainly doesn't work that way with Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, I guess it's just that it goes back to what you said earlier, right? Prior to the loss to Holly Holm, she was invincible. She was undefeated in UFC, and And that was the brand. That wasn't the person, but that is how the brand had been built up, and that's why she garnered some mainstream attention and to an extent achieved mainstream success.
Well, and she was a lot more than just a fighter. Certainly that's the way she was packaged. You know, she was a trailblazer. She opened doors for the UFC that they could never have dreamed of. You know, she's appearing. I mean, 5 years ago, as an MMA media member, you know, I never would have fathomed that, you know, there would be fight announcements on Good Morning America. And this is a sport that was so underground, that was not that long ago, you know, banned in most of the United States, that was off pay-per-view. And now we've reached the point where, you know, they're announcing fights on Good Morning America, of all places, in front of, you know, 40-year-old housewives. So she opened those doors for the UFC, and she wasn't just some kind of figure that they turned into a fighter and, you know, were protecting. Like I said, she was fighting the best of the best. But, you know, unfortunately, this sport, it is a brutal one. And if you lose on that kind of stage, in that kind of fashion, and you feel like, you know, your identity has been taken away from you, it's hard to recover from that. And, you know, she came back 13 months later. Most people would think that that's enough time to recover. Unfortunately for her, it wasn't.
With Ariel Helwani, quickly before we get you out of here, Ariel, thought on what Dana White had to say in response to Meryl Streep. I think it's much ado about nothing. I had a good laugh at it, calling her an uppity 80-year-old woman. But it's the talk of the internet. It's all over the place right now. And I suppose, if anything, Meryl Streep bringing it up, any publicity is good publicity.
Oh, gosh, I could do 3 hours on just this. You know, it's a funny thing. Look, first off, it's a victory for MMA, because not that long ago people would call it ultimate fighting or cage fighting or God knows what else. The fact that she actually called it mixed martial arts, I think, was a small victory for us, that we're being lumped in there with, you know, football. Great. Of course, I 1,000% disagree with her statement that mixed martial arts is not an art. And of course, I mean, I think that goes without saying. It's 100% an art. I mean, the freaking word art is in the word, and also, I mean, what these men and women do there is nothing short of amazing. There are different levels to art, different kinds of art. We could go on and on. I think it was interesting to see how the MMA community reacted to this. I think there is, and even people in the UFC, I think there is this intense desire to be mainstream in our sport and to have everyone love our sport, and that's just not going to be the case. That's not the case with anything in life. I have friends who like to smoke marijuana. I don't like to smoke marijuana. I have friends who voted for Donald Trump. I wouldn't vote for Donald Trump. We all have different ideologies, different interests, different likes. Not everyone has to love what we love. And in MMA, sometimes we have this desire to make everyone into a fan and to make everyone love the sport. That doesn't need to happen, and it will never happen, because look at what we love. It's something that will turn some people off. It's two men or women fighting in a cage. Just, you know, you can cut maybe half of the country off right there just with that idea. They're just not interested in that sort of thing. But I think that MMA fans need to lighten up a little bit and understand that not everyone's going to like our sport. And what Dana said is true to a degree. That's not his demographic. I don't think you need to take shots at her necessarily. I thought what Scott Coker did, the president of Bellator, was very interesting by inviting her to his next event on January 22nd, 21st, and there you see the sort of difference between Scott and Dana. But, yeah, the fact that this turned into a story was kind of mind-numbing, because to me it was, you know, really a non-story.
Right. All right, my man. Thanks so much for this. Really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yes, thank you as always. I really appreciate it.